Welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank. Let's call this volume 25 of the Integralist Chronicles. Okay, guys, lots of new subscribers to this channel. Listen, for those of you that are new, the Integralist Chronicles is my story and how I came to be a Catholic integralist, how I view the world through my experiences, through life, my fallen nature, my mistakes, my ups, my downs, and everything I've experienced in this world, in this life, everything that I've seen, that I try to go back to the past and communicate different ideas of this worldview that's been created over 53 years of my life to try and explain to you how I see the world and why I see it the way that I do. And tonight, I want to talk to you about the Mormons. That's right, the Mormons are the Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ, as they are like to call it now. They've tried to move away from that label, the Mormons, kind of a rebranding kind of a thing with them. And so, what is fascinating for those of you that don't know, I've now lived in Utah for about 20 years. And so I am a Catholic in what is considered missionary territory for us. I kind of left California 20 years ago, as I was originally born in Los Angeles, raised there. But then me and my wife, we fled for greener pastures, like many Catholics have fled all over the country as we've all been dispersed in one capacity or another. And what's interesting about that, this is kind of the idea that I'm going to go down, and that is, what are the differences between Mormons and Catholics in a cultural sense, not theology. Obviously, theologically, we have vast differences. Mormonism in a theological realm is very odd and very strange in my mind. And obviously, as Catholics, we will consider a heresy. But that being said, living in Utah as I have now for 20 years, I got to be honest with you guys, I have not met a Mormon that I have not liked. They really are nice people, well ordered, well structured. They got big, beautiful families. I got to give them credit to a certain degree. And in that sense, I was cruising Twitter yesterday, and there was a Catholic basically lecturing other Catholics on Twitter about the success rate of Mormons and how they have surpassed Catholics sort of in the realm of family structures. And basically pointing out again how they're having more children. We Catholics talk about having children, and yet our fertility rates have all dropped. Sure, we may have some trad communities where Catholics are having kids and things of that nature, but generally the Mormons are doing a much better job. And this kind of Twitter post basically pointed out how just Mormons are inherently superior when it comes to keeping their communities together, building strong, big, beautiful families, and everything that comes along with trying to create, again, a stronger sort of familial concept within sort of their own communities. And basically point out how Catholics have failed and Mormons are better at this. Now, I find that interesting because I have my observations living in Utah for 20 years now. And I think there's some truth to that. But I think we have to keep a few things in context, because the Mormons and the Catholics, we Catholics, I should say, we've had a different history. And the reason why we Catholics have struggled so much, more than say a smaller group like the Mormons, is because we Catholics, we're living on foreign lands. Yeah, we are. We're living on foreign lands. Even those that were born here in the United States, we're living on foreign territory. We're born of a liberal world where, in many ways, our nonconformist views as Catholics are always a contradiction of sorts. And this is why Catholics, in the long term, have been forced to surrender their Catholic values. For Mormons, it's a whole different ballgame. One, they never had the eyes of the world on them, like the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church being the moral and philosophical foundation of the West from at least the fourth century all the way up until the Enlightenment, at the very least, 300 years. Everything that we know to be the greatness of Western civilization is basically what? It's Greek philosophy, Roman law, and the morality of the Catholic Church. That's what built the West. And in many ways, not to diminish or to talk bad about the Mormons, they've been insignificant in many ways. Now, they will tell you they've grown by leaps and bounds over the past 50, 60, 70, 80 years. Fine. And we could touch on that and why that is. But let's be honest about a few things. Mormons have never been on foreign lands. Mormons, when they ran from the East Coast to the middle of Utah, found a way to sort of isolate themselves for a very long time. And the extended sort of liberal world that grew around post-Enlightenment did not affect them as adversely as, say, the Catholic Church and really Catholic societies and Catholic communities and Catholic families. That isolation gave them an opportunity to structure their what do you want to call it, their religious communities with a little bit more a little bit more peace, I guess you could say. And they had a longer period of time to isolate themselves and protect themselves, incubate themselves from the outside world. And now Mormons, as the world has become much smaller because of mass communication, mass transit, things of that nature, they're starting to have lots of the same problems as everybody else is having with, sort of the nature of a sexually depraved society. I live here. They're having trouble keeping their marriages together. They're having trouble with the LGBT community. As the LGBT community over the past 20 years has really gone after the Mormons hard, and they're struggling to keep their own youth in line in regards to this ideology that has attacked them. Again, because the world has become much smaller because of the internet, social media, again, television, newscasts, all this stuff that is pounded in our daily lives, the Mormons are feeling the heat because they're not able to keep the elements of liberalism away from their own communities anymore. It's creeping in, and as a result, they're having problems. Now, are they so far gone as Catholics in America that have been bombarded with this mess since we stepped foot on this land 125, 150 years ago? No, they were able to keep that away, shielded away, because they were never at the mercy of the white Anglo-Protestant society, not in the same direct manner as the Catholics were. Because the moment the Catholic immigrants got here, like I said, one, they're in foreign land. They had to follow orders. And what we know, especially reading books like E. Michael Jones, The Slaughter of Cities, is how the Catholics were purposely attacked by the white Anglo-Protestants to break up Catholic sort of ethnic communities, break up that hegemony and disperse them out into the suburbs in order to break up a political bloc. Mormons never had to face that, not to that degree, or at least not as long as the Catholics had to deal with that problem. And this is just, again, dealing with this in the micro, right? Sort of in the everyday management of American life and what we could see over the past 40, 50, 60, 100 years. But even more so, let's go back even further. Let's go back to European roots, because this is where the crux of it matters for Catholics and the world coming down on us in a way that Mormons never had to face. We had, again, the French Revolution and Freemasonry come down on us. Judaism come down on us. Communism come down on us. We had classical liberalism come down on us. 2 world wars that bombed Latin Catholic nations into oblivion so they could be subservient to the liberal world. We had a Cold War that ran all over those same Latin American or Latin European nations after the war. We had Freemasonry infiltrate the church and Catholic communities. Now, Freemasons, ironically enough, Mormonism being a religion based on Freemasonry. We know Joseph Smith was a Freemason. His father was a Freemason. You look at Mormon art, you look at Mormon literature, you look at their sermons, their services and the way they're structured is completely Freemasonic. And so, again, Mormonism being welcomed by Freemasonry, not being in the crosshairs of a sort of a nefarious group that looks to overthrow Christendom or has historically. These are things you have to consider. And because Mormons have never been on foreign lands, they've been able to protect themselves more. All this stuff matters, guys, right? The Mormons have not been in the crosshairs of history. The Catholic Church has. And this is why Catholic communities have fallen, they've collapsed, the family's been attacked. We've been forced to live in liberal nations and under liberal laws, and most of our offspring have been consumed by this liberalism at this point in history. And the attack against the Catholic faith has been real for a long time. Now, we've masked a lot of it with the idea of freedom, liberty, right? The sort of the meaningless platitudes of Western society that claims that we're allowed to practice our faith, but our faith cannot be sort of the dominant element of any society anymore, right? We're just one of many denominations. But of course, Catholic civilization works different. We're not Protestants, right? We believe in hegemonous communities where our faith is an outward expression, not simply an interior expression like many Protestants. That outward expression extends out into the community, the culture, and eventually into the politics of any nation. We've all been denied that as Catholics. The Mormons, on the other hand, being a byproduct of Freemasonry and its origins linked to the American founding, they've had an easier time, first of which they have allowed the American government to sort of reform some of their dogmas in their church, like polygamy, for example, civil rights issues. The church has kind of bended and folded. It doesn't have, again, sort of this rock solid doctrine like the Catholics do that has to sort of survive through the testimony of history. They can be more malleable with their rules and their laws while keeping proper order and justice within their communities. We Catholics, unfortunately, we're kind of the pain in the asses of history. We're not conformists. We're very difficult to rule and govern because our doctrines, our beliefs, they don't change. Listen, the Mormons, again, they've been dealing with this LGBT issue now for the past 2 decades here. And their youth, they're falling for the propaganda of the far left and the homosexual community. And the church has already begun to bend some laws, again, very softly, so they don't contradict past history, but they're bending to the LGBT community, right? And really they have to, because just as the American government told them no on polygamy and the racial stereotypes that they had at one point in history, now the American government that has endorsed LGBT marriage or gay marriage through the Elberfeld decision, now the Mormon church in some capacity has to bend to the American government, because there is a symbiotic relation between the Mormon church, its founding, and the American government, whether that's a constitutional idea of the founding or where there's general a governance idea in general, that the Mormon church and the American government are sort of symbiotic to a certain extent. And so Mormons always have to adjust to that. But I think also, too, coming back to a more localized level, apart from the fact that Catholics have been attacked all over the world, we've all been displaced through mass migration and immigration because of world wars and revolutions, Masonic revolution throughout the entire 19th century and 20th century. And again, Latin Europeans fleeing for the Americas, Argentina, Brazil, Canada, all over the world. In many ways, Mormons never had to run really from anything. Sure, you could say they had to run from the East Coast, from the long arm of the law, because the Protestants like polygamy. But once they got out to the middle of Utah, they were fine. They were able to sort of build this community. They were able to isolate themselves pretty much for an entire century, a century and a quarter, until the mass media, mass transit comes around. And as we've seen for the past 40, 50 years, they began to have a lot of the same problems as really the rest of the world has. But because they were able to isolate themselves in many ways, they were able to protect themselves longer, keeping these familial structures in place. And again, when we look at more of the micro elements of Mormonism, what they do that we Catholics don't do, and we could debate whether this is right or wrong, but the Mormons keep more stringent control. First of all, they don't have a veil of separation between the laity and the clergy. Any good Mormon boy that keeps himself in line, follows orders, and keeps his family in line can rise up the ranks of the Mormon church, become part of the clergy, demand more and more power over time. He is given a subset of community control over his local community if he rises. There's social pressures that are used all over the place. And there's also a welfare system that they use in order to control and manipulate. The welfare system is very powerful, especially for those that are in a state of poverty, especially those I've seen out here in Utah, where many people move out here, they struggle to get along. Well, guess who's willing to welcome you in and give you a helping hand? The Mormons. It's the Mormons. They're willing to buy your faith for you to a certain degree. It's not, again, we Catholics, we work purely off free will and conscience. But in a religion where there's a structured authority with a tax system in place where you can give or add or take added benefits of this world, they have a powerful tool for leverage over people's lives to get them in the fold and keep them in the fold. See, that matters at the end of the day, and the way they sort of conduct business and how they maintain structures and control within the Mormon church. Let's not forget that. And so I guess my point here is that, yes, Mormon families are still doing relatively good compared to a lot of other religions or communities or culture structure, without a doubt. But one, they're starting to fracture, and we see it in Utah. Their divorce rates are very high out here. That's number one. You got to remember that. Now, I'm not sure what the Mormon teaching is on divorce and remarriage. We know that within the realm of the Catholic faith, the Catholic Church, once you get into the trad communities or the older, sort of more devout Latin European communities, those have some of the lowest divorce rates in the world. Listen, I've said it before. If it's a matter of these homogenous ethnicities that are Catholic, which all marry within their own ethnicity, those are the strongest marriages I've ever known. The strongest marriages I have ever known are when Sicilians marry other Sicilians. One, they're Sicilian. Two, they're Catholics. They share common values, common bond, common history, common bloodline, common faith, common everything. Those are the strongest marriages I've ever known, right? But in a world where we've been liberalized, especially in America, this is where the Catholic family has absolutely just been destroyed. Now we're marrying Protestants and Jews and people of other ethnicities. And I'm not, in theory, against race mixing. I'm not. But generally speaking, marrying within your own ethnicity is a very powerful tool. It makes for stronger bonds and stronger connections. And so this is why we see that when race mixing happens, those tend to have a greater, higher rate of divorce just as much as anything else. So when we're comparing and contrasting Catholic families to Mormon families, Mormons that have been able to carve out their own community for many, many decades, where are our Catholic communities in America? Where are they? They don't exist. They've all been dispersed. We had them for a while through immigration, through these ethnic communities, but they were purposely targeted and purposely destroyed. We have not seen that in the Mormon community. Yes, the Mormons face their challenges now, but they never had a government in place or white Anglo Protestants that have come in to purposely destroy Mormon communities, force them to disperse, and then remarry outside of their faith, outside of their bloodlines. They've been able to contain this sort of ethnic hegemony that they have, whatever it is, right? I mean, at some point, we're all Europeans, right? And this is the brilliant thing that Mormons have done, and you got to give them credit here, is that while we Catholics have all dispersed, marrying all kinds of different, pluralistic ethnicities and religions and things of that nature, that has been part and parcel a big reason why our families have been destroyed. The Mormons have maintained this sort of a white ethnic identity, right? One of the things that in Utah they talk about a lot, one thing they're very proud of is the idea how my ancestors came here on the handcarts, right? They're peeling back to, days, close to the colonial times, where this is their point of origin. This is their history. This is their ancestry. This is their bloodline. And they've been able to maintain that for many decades now as an important concept of this sort of white eccentricity based upon their religion. It's fascinating how they've done that. It's what we Catholics used to do long before, again, the attack of the Freemasons and the Enlightenment. That's why Catholic communities were so big and beautiful and strong, a couple hundred years ago. Why Christendom was the philosophical foundation that built the West. It was the moral law. It was the moral compass of Western civilization. But that was all attacked by Freemasonry at the end of the day, and the liberal world that Freemasonry brought with it. The Mormons were able to isolate themselves more. We Catholics were the much bigger target. We were attacked in every part of the world: Italy, Germany, Spain, Portugal, England, even before the Reformation. That was an attack. We know that. And so we have to keep all these things in context. As the world has sort of run away from Catholicism, liberalism has risen. What you're going to see is those communities that were able to protect themselves longer, maintain themselves in isolation, were always going to be those that survived liberalism the best. The Mormons had a piece of land out here in the middle of nowhere, let's be honest, for many centuries, or many decades, I should say, and they were able to sort of incubate themselves from the outside world. But again, the moment you get I-15 running through the middle of Utah, smack all the way through Colorado, well, the world just became smaller. Add television to that, network news, add the internet, social media, and the Mormons are starting to have their issues. Let's remember, the Mormons just had an advantage of simply being able to take care of themselves and not be the overt enemy like the Catholic Church was. The Mormons were never bombed into an oblivion for their faith. The Mormons were never attacked by liberalism. The Mormons were never attacked by Freemasonry. The Mormons never had to deal with Judeo-Bolshevism. Never did the Mormons have to deal with that. When you look at the destruction of Catholic culture, Catholic civilization, Catholic family, look at the assaults by which Catholics have had to live with in the liberal world ever since the Enlightenment. That explains it all. In every nation of Western Europe, and really every nation where Catholicism has had a prominent role. The bottom line is this: Mormons have done great, but they too are having problems now. It's going to only continue to unravel as liberalism kind of stretches its evil tentacles in every community. The Mormons always had home field advantage. We Catholics, we lost home field advantage 200 years ago, and that matters. That's why our communities and our families have been destroyed. But yet, the remnant still remains, because the Holy Spirit works within the one true Catholic Church established by Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago. The remnant may be small, as Pope Benedict XVI proclaimed before he passed away. Maybe the faith goes down to a few homes, a few cottages, but that will be the remnant that rises, right? With liberalism, everything else falls, but the faith will remain. There's a reason why the analogy of the faith, 2,000 years for Catholics, no other institution has ever survived it. It's the only religion that doesn't change course, doesn't change its doctrines, doesn't change its beliefs, no matter what hardships face our way, no matter what persecutions we face. We stand fast to our beliefs, to our theology, to our church, and to Jesus Christ, our King, without altering his laws, right? The blood of the martyrs, as we always talk about them. The Mormons and really the rest of Protestantism, it always conforms, right? It conforms primarily to liberal culture and liberal governance. Catholics don't do that. For that reason, it's why Catholics have had to be persecuted throughout history, and for a large part, Protestants have avoided a lot of that persecution. So there you have it. I just think it's, apples and oranges, the comparison. Don't let the deception of Mormonism fool you. I think, listen, they're good people. I got no problems with them. Obviously, they have some great structures, but at the same time, they have their problems. And, when you can rewrite the rules on, especially the sins below the belt, like the Mormons have, they're a little iffy on the divorce issue. They got some caveats. They're a little iffy in the contraception issue. They got some caveats. I believe they also got some caveats on the abortion issue. Now they're bending on the LGBT issue. Let's keep this in mind. Catholics are persecuted because we don't bend. We never bend. That's the irony of it all. I don't want to hear about the church crisis. There's something else going on in Rome right now. Again, an infiltration of Freemasonry. We know that of Freemasonry, which ironically enough, Mormonism has never been targeted, because like I said, Mormonism is Freemasonry. Just look at it, study it, read it. You'll see it for yourself. It's apples and oranges. The Mormons have never had to face the weight of the liberal world on top of them. In fact, in some ways, they've been given a free rein to a certain degree. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see here. The Integralist Chronicles, Volume 25. I want to thank you for joining me. This is Frank, sign off for Franklin speaking. Good night, everybody.